The first thing I do after waking up is check the date on my phone 3 separate times, because the math refuses to make sense in my head. 11 days. That's what I have left before the temperature drop hits, and I already know exactly how bad it gets, because I lived through it once already, 6 months of it, and I died at the end. I don't try to explain that to anyone. Nobody would believe me, and honestly I'm not sure I fully believe it myself, except that every single detail I remember from those 6 months has already started arriving on schedule. The freak magnetic storm that knocks out 3 satellites over the Pacific happened yesterday, exactly the day I remembered it happening. The government statement calling it a temporary anomaly, nothing to worry about, aired at 6 p.m. exactly the way I remembered it airing. I don't need anyone to believe me. I just need 11 days and a working bank account. My phone buzzes on the nightstand. A text from Celine, the woman I've been engaged to for the past year and a half. Griffin, my sister needs the guest cottage deed transferred into her name before the wedding. It's just a formality. You'll do this for me, right? In the life I already lived through once, I said yes to that exact request, signed the cottage over within the week, and 8 months later watched Celine's sister use that same cottage as leverage to buy her way into a warlord's protection while I froze outside a barricaded door begging to be let back into a shelter I'd paid for with my own money. Not this time. I don't answer the text. I get dressed, walk to the bank, and start liquidating everything I own before the sun sets on day 1. The house. Every stock, every fund, every collectible my late father left me. By the end of day 2 I'm sitting on just under 70 million in cash, and in 11 days none of it is going to be worth the paper it's printed on, so I'm not wasting a single hour being sentimental about any of it. What I need isn't money. What I need is somewhere the cold can't reach. I already know exactly where that is, because in my old life I stumbled across it 3 months too late, half frozen and desperate, and found the entrance sealed shut by someone smarter and faster than me. This time, I'm the one getting there first. The old Kessler transit vaults sit on the eastern edge of downtown, for levels of decommissioned underground rail tunnels and storage depots the city abandoned almost 30 years ago when the light rail project collapsed halfway through construction. Nobody wanted the property. The access tunnels flood every spring, the elevator shaft is condemned, and half the retail units built into the upper concourse never even got finished before the money ran out. It's been sitting empty since before I was born, a hole in the city's balance sheet that everyone quietly agreed to stop thinking about. Which is exactly why it's perfect. Reinforced concrete built to transit authority spec, for sublevels deep, its own drainage system, and thick enough overhead that nothing short of a direct strike is getting through those ceilings. The city clerk who handles the sale looks at me like I've grown a second head. You want the Kessler vaults? The actual Kessler vaults. You know that place has been condemned twice. I know. There's no foot traffic down there. No prospects. The city's been trying to unload that liability for a decade. That's fine. I'm not planning on foot traffic. He shrugs, because a fool with $70 million is not his problem to solve, and by the end of day 3 the deed is in my name for $4,200,000, transferred same day, no financing, no inspection period, because I don't have 11 days to spare on due diligence. The foreman I hire to run the build-out meets me at the condemned elevator shaft that same afternoon, takes one look at the water damage staining the concrete, and lets out a low whistle. You bought this on purpose. I did. Boss, I've built bunkers for actual doomsday types before, rich guys who wanted a place to ride out a war. This is worse than any of those. This place has been rotting for 30 years. That's why I'm paying you triple your normal rate to have it finished in 8 days instead of 8 months. His eyebrows go up at the number I quote him, and whatever objection he was about to raise dies somewhere in his throat. The plan is simple in outline and brutal in execution. Sublevel 1 becomes the mechanical floor, generators, fuel storage, water treatment, a defensive airlock at every access point. Sublevel 2 becomes cold storage and the medical bay. Sublevel 3 becomes living quarters, real ones, kitchens and bedrooms and a proper ventilation loop instead of a hole in the ground with cots in it. Sublevel 4, the deepest one, the one flooded worst and hardest to reach, I tell the foreman to seal off entirely and leave for later. He doesn't argue. He's too busy running numbers on how fast his crew can move. 8 days. Round-the-clock shifts, triple pay, and a bonus structure steep enough that every single contractor on that crew shows up an hour early every single morning without me having to ask twice. While the build-out runs, I start stockpiling, and I don't stockpile like someone hedging against a maybe. I stockpile like someone who has already watched every store shelf in the city get stripped bare within 72 hours of the first cold snap, because I have. Fuel by the tanker load. A frozen foods distributor going through bankruptcy sells me their entire remaining inventory at a fraction of cost because their buyer backed out and they need the warehouse space cleared by Friday. 22 truckloads roll into the Kessler vaults over 2 days, more meat and grain than any reasonable person could eat in 5 years, and the site manager overseeing the delivery just shakes his head the whole time like he's watching a car crash happen in slow motion. You running a restaurant chain out of a hole in the ground, buddy? Something like that. Medicine. Antibiotics, fever reducers, wound care, everything I can legally buy in bulk, and a few things I have to pay extra to get without the usual paperwork. So, batteries. Seed stock for a grow room I'm having built into a converted maintenance bay on sublevel 3, because I remember exactly how much a single fresh vegetable was worth 6 months into the last version of this, and I am never again going to be the kind of desperate that makes you dig up a flower bed looking for something edible. By day 6 the build-out is nearly finished, and that's when Celine calls for the 4th time that week. I let it go to voicemail, same as the last 3. She texts instead. Griffin, Dominic says you sold the house. Are you insane? What is wrong with you? Call me back right now. Dominic, my best friend since college, the man who stood up as my best man 18 months ago at the engagement dinner, the same man who in my last life walked into my shelter with a dozen armed strangers behind him and threw me out into a storm that killed most of the people who tried to survive it outdoors. I don't call her back. On day 7, the foreman hands me the keys to 3 reinforced blast doors, walks me through every system twice, and stands at the threshold looking almost proud of what his crew managed to pull off in a week and a half. Whatever you're prepping for, boss, this place could survive it. I mean that. I know, I tell him, and he has no idea how literally I mean it. The final payment clears that evening. The crew packs up and leaves, and for the first time in 8 days I'm alone in a building that used to be a rotting hole in the ground and is now, floor by floor, the safest place in the entire city. I spend the last 4 days before the freeze hits doing something I never got the chance to do the first time around, which is prepare properly instead of scrambling. I run every system twice. I memorize every camera angle I've had installed around the perimeter, hidden in old traffic signal boxes and behind a defunct newsstand and clipped to the underside of a railing nobody's looked at twice in a decade. I set up a command station on sublevel 1 with more monitors than any single person should reasonably need, because in my old life the thing that killed me wasn't the cold, it was not seeing the people who came for what I had until they were already through the door. That's not happening again. On the morning of the 11th day, my phone buzzes one more time. A single text from Dominic this time, not Celine. Heard you bought some kind of underground bunker. Real mature, Griffin. Celine's crying every night over this. You want to talk like adults, or are you just going to keep hiding? I stare at the message for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the console and don't pick it up again. At exactly 6:14 that evening, the first reports start rolling in from research stations near the poles. Temperature readings nobody can explain. A pressure system behaving in ways that violate every model the meteorologists have ever built. By 9 p.m. the first flurries start falling over the city, and something about the way people react on the street cameras tells me they already sense, on some animal level, that this isn't ordinary weather. They're right. It isn't. I watch from the command station as the first hard freeze rolls through downtown just past midnight, temperatures cratering faster than any historical record has ever shown, dropping through 0, through -30, -60, and still falling. Streetlights flicker and die in sequence, block by block, as the grid buckles under demand it was never built to handle. A car alarm goes off somewhere and doesn't stop, tires locked solid to frozen asphalt, the owner nowhere in sight. By 2 a.m. the readout on my exterior sensors shows -91 degrees Celsius, and it's still climbing down. I know, because I lived through the back half of this once already, that it doesn't stop there. This isn't a cold snap. This is a full collapse of every weather system the planet has ever run on, and before it bottoms out, the number is going to sit somewhere past -150, cold enough that exposed skin doesn't just freeze, it shatters. I sit in a warm, brightly lit room 4 stories underground, watching the temperature drop on a screen while somewhere above me an entire city runs out of places to hide from it. Celine's next text arrives at 2:40 in the morning. Griffin. Something's wrong. It's actually snowing and it's not stopping. Dominic says the power's out on our whole block. Please call me. I'm scared. I don't call. By dawn, the first survivors start appearing on my perimeter cameras, wrapped in whatever they could grab on the way out the door, moving in that particular hunched, desperate shuffle of people who understand all at once that the world they woke up in yesterday no longer exists. Some of them wander past the Kessler vaults without slowing, not knowing what's underneath the cracked, unremarkable surface and trance I deliberately left looking abandoned. Others stop, study the reinforced door I had installed behind a facade designed to look exactly like every other rusted transit gate in this part of the city, and keep moving, because nothing about the outside gives away what's inside. That's exactly how I want it for now. I make myself a pot of coffee in a kitchen 4 stories below a city that no longer has electricity, and I watch the temperature keep falling. By midday it's sitting at -112, and the first bodies have already started appearing on the perimeter cameras, people who didn't make it indoors in time, who trusted a car that wouldn't start or a building that wasn't sealed well enough, curled in doorways under snow that doesn't melt because nothing above ground is warm enough anymore to melt it. I don't look away from the screens. I told myself I wouldn't, because looking away is how you convince yourself none of this is actually happening, and I've already died once believing exactly that kind of comfortable lie. At 3:17 that afternoon, my exterior microphones pick up pounding on the surface access panel 2 blocks from the main entrance. One I'd forgotten was even wired for sound. I pull up the feed and find 3 people huddled against it, faces wrapped in scarves and improvised layers, one of them clearly injured, dragging a leg that isn't bending the way legs are supposed to bend. I don't recognize any of them. Not yet. But I recognize the look on their faces, because I wore that exact expression once myself, on the other side of a door exactly like this one, in a life that no longer technically exists. I watch them a long moment before I decide anything at all. Behind me, deeper in the vault system, past the point where the foreman's crew stopped working, sublevel 4 sits exactly as sealed and untouched as I ordered it left. I hadn't thought about it once in the chaos of the last 11 days. I think about it now, staring at that flooded, condemned lowest level on the building schematics still pinned to my command station wall, because something about the original city survey attached to the Kessler Vault's deed mentioned it in a footnote I only skimmed once and never fully read. Access restricted. Structure predates current municipal foundation records. Origin unconfirmed. At the time I assumed it was bureaucratic nothing, some old clerical error nobody had bothered correcting in 3 decades of paperwork. Sitting here now, watching 3 strangers freeze against a door 2 blocks away while the temperature outside falls past a number the human body was never built to survive, that footnote suddenly feels like the single loosest thread in this entire plan, and some instinct I can't name is telling me I'm going to regret not pulling on it sooner. But that's a problem for later. Right now there are people outside my walls, and for the first time since I woke up 11 days ago already knowing exactly how this story is supposed to end, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do next. I pull up the audio feed at the surface panel and listen before I decide anything. Please, a woman's voice says, cracked and raw from the cold. My brother can't walk anymore. We're not asking for supplies. Just somewhere out of the wind. I study the 3 of them on screen. A woman in her 30s, a boy who can't be older than 9 clutching her coat, and an older man slumped between them, one leg dragging at an angle that makes my stomach turn even through a grainy camera feed. I don't know their names yet. I don't know if they're carrying anything I need to worry about, whether the exposed skin on the older man's hands has already started that faint gray discoloration I remember from 6 months of watching people change into something that used to be human. I can't tell any of that from a security camera 2 blocks away. What I do know is that the panel they're pounding on isn't actually a door. It's an old maintenance access hatch I wired for audio and left otherwise untouched, 30 yards from the real entrance and completely sealed from the inside. Even if I wanted to let them in through it, there's nothing on the other side but a dead-end shaft. I switch the feed to the primary entrance instead and watch the temperature reading tick down another ½ degree while I make a decision I already half regret making before I've finished making it. I open the outdoor speaker. 2 blocks west. There's a real door, not the one you're at. Knock there instead. The woman's head snaps toward the speaker box, confusion and hope colliding on her face at once. Who is this? Is someone actually in there? 2 blocks west, I repeat, and cut the feed before she can ask anything else. I don't know yet if I'm going to let them in. I only know I'm not going to let them freeze to death pounding on a hatch that was never going anywhere in the first place. It takes them almost 20 minutes to make the distance, 20 minutes I spend running quarantine protocol checks I built into the airlock system almost as an afterthought during the build-out, because some instinct from my old life insisted on it even when I couldn't fully explain why. Full-body thermal scan. A slow, deliberate pass through a decontamination chamber sealed on both ends. 72 hours minimum isolation before anyone gets anywhere near the living quarters. No exceptions, not even for a 9-year-old boy who can barely stand from exhaustion. When they finally reach the real entrance, I switch on the speaker one more time. There's a chamber just inside this door. It'll open for exactly 1 person at a time. You go through decontamination, you get scanned, and you wait 72 hours before you see anything past the first checkpoint. Those are the only terms I'm offering. The woman doesn't hesitate. Whatever you need. Just get my brother somewhere warm. I cycle the outer door. Her name, I learn over the next 3 days, is Priya Okonkwo. The boy is her son, Femi. The older man isn't her brother at all, just a neighbor named Walt Ferris who'd been alone in his apartment when the power failed and had nowhere else to go when Priya knocked on his door on her way out. She'd carried half his weight for 6 blocks through air that could shatter exposed skin, and when I finally get a clear look at his leg during the medical screening, it isn't frostbite doing the damage. It's a break, old and badly set, aggravated by 6 blocks of desperate walking on a joint that should have been resting. I don't have a doctor. That's the first real gap in my planning I discover, sitting in the command station watching Walt grit his teeth through a scan while Priya holds Femi's hand outside the isolation glass. Because I built this place to survive cold and hunger and I somehow never accounted for the ordinary, boring reality that people get hurt in ways a first aid kit can't fully fix. I make a note of it. It's not going to be the last gap I find. Over the next several days, more people find their way to the Kessler vaults, some drawn by rumors already spreading through the handful of surface shelters still functioning, some just stumbling onto the entrance by accident while fleeing something worse. I turn most of them away with directions to other shelters I remember surviving longer than most in my old life: a reinforced parking structure 4 blocks south, a hospital basement with its own generator 2 neighborhoods over. I only let in the ones who arrive without an army at their back and without the particular desperate cruelty I remember watching consume so many people in those first weeks. By the end of the first week, my population has grown to 11. Priya and Femi and Walt. A retired engineer named Soledad Vance who talks her way past my initial hesitation by correctly diagnosing a flaw in my water recycling loop from nothing but the sound the pump makes through the airlock speaker. 2 brothers, Cole and Ashton Reyes, who show up half-starved but strong enough to be genuinely useful once they've cleared quarantine. A young woman named Ines Marchetti who doesn't talk much about where she came from and flinches whenever anyone raises their voice, and I decide not to push for details she isn't offering. Every single one of them goes through the same 72 hours, no exceptions, and every single one of them, once they're through it, gets the same rules laid out clear and non-negotiable. Supplies are shared and logged. Nobody touches the mechanical floor or the command station without me present. Nobody opens an exterior door without authorization. Break the rules and you're out, storm or no storm, because I have already watched exactly what happens to a shelter that starts making exceptions for people it likes. Celine doesn't stop texting. By day 9 after the freeze hit, her messages have shifted from angry to something closer to pleading, the kind of tone I remember all too well from a version of this story where those same words worked on me every single time. Griffin, please. Dominic and I have nowhere left to go. Our building's generator failed 2 days ago. People are dying in the stairwell. I know I hurt you, but I never thought it would come to this. Please, if you have any love left for me at all, just let us in. I read it twice, sitting alone in the command station at 2 in the morning with 11 other people asleep 3 floors above me in beds that are actually warm, and I feel something that surprises me by how little it resembles anger. It's closer to a kind of tired, distant pity, the specific exhaustion of a man who has already lived through this exact conversation once and knows precisely how it ends if he lets it play out the same way twice. I don't answer. 2 days later, Dominic tries a different approach entirely, and this is where the story stops rhyming with the one I already lived through and starts genuinely surprising me for the first time since I woke up 11 days before the freeze. The message isn't a plea. It's a photograph. It shows a manila folder spread open on a table, and inside it, a document I recognize instantly because it has my father's signature on the bottom of it, a deed transfer my father drew up 11 years ago, months before he died, for a small commercial property downtown that I always assumed had been sold off decades earlier as part of settling his estate. Underneath the photo, Dominic's message reads, "Celine found this going through your father's old files last year. Funny thing, Griffin. Turns out your dad left something behind that never got folded into probate. Something with your name on it and an address that isn't the house you sold. Open the door and I'll tell you exactly where it is. Otherwise it freezes right along with the rest of us, and you never find out what it was." I stare at the photograph for a long time, turning the deed number over in my memory, and I realize, with a slow, uncomfortable certainty, that I have absolutely no idea what property he's talking about. Nothing about it appeared anywhere in the 6 months I already lived through. This isn't a memory repeating itself. This is something entirely new, a piece of the board nobody showed me the last time around, and the not knowing sits in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. I pull up every property record I have access to under my father's name, cross-reference it against every deed transfer on file with the city, and find nothing that matches. Whatever Dominic thinks he's holding, it isn't in any database I can reach from down here. Which means either he's lying, banking on desperation to make me open a door I'd otherwise never open. Or my father left something behind that even I, in an entire life already lived once through to its bitter end, never found out about. I don't sleep much that night. I sit at the command station running searches that go nowhere, and somewhere in the small hours, my eyes drift back to the building schematics still pinned to the wall above my monitors, to that footnote about sublevel 4 I haven't thought about since the first day of the freeze. Access restricted. Structure predates current municipal foundation records. Origin unconfirmed. I don't believe in coincidence anymore. Not after everything else about this second chance has already proven itself to be anything but random. I pull the original deed paperwork for the Kessler vaults out of the file box I never bothered scanning properly in the rush to get the place build-out finished in 8 days, and I start reading every single page instead of skimming for the parts that matter to construction. Buried on page 11, in language so dry and bureaucratic it's clearly designed to be skipped over by anyone in a hurry, is a clause I somehow missed twice already. A previous private owner, decades before the city took possession for the failed transit project, is listed only by a set of initials and a notation that the sublevel 4 access was sealed at the owner's specific request, prior to sale, contents undisclosed. The initials are Kitch. My father's name was Edmund Hale. My father died 11 years ago of a heart attack in his own study, 3 days before my 22nd birthday, and in every version of my life I've now lived through, that has always been the whole story. A quiet, unremarkable man who ran a modest import business and left behind exactly the estate everyone expected him to leave behind. No secrets. No mysteries. Just a son who inherited a house and a handful of collectibles and spent the next decade assuming he already knew everything worth knowing about the man who raised him. I sit with that initial for a long time before I move. Whatever Dominic thinks he's holding over me, some deed to a property I never knew existed, it can't possibly be more important than a sealed sublevel 4 decades old, hidden behind my father's own initials in a filing clause nobody bothered to read twice. I don't reply to his message. I don't reply to Celine either. Instead, I pull Otis Brennan aside the next morning, a wiry, quiet man in his 50s who showed up on day 6 with nothing but a bag of hand tools and a story about surviving alone in his building's boiler room for 3 days before the cold finally drove him to try his luck at every sealed door in the neighborhood. He cleared quarantine on day 9, and since then he's spent every waking hour fixing the dozen small mechanical problems my rushed 8-day build-out inevitably left behind. I need eyes on something, I tell him, and lead him down to the access point the foreman sealed on my own orders less than 2 weeks ago. Otis studies the reinforced barrier for a long moment, running one calloused hand along a seam in the concrete that doesn't quite match the rest of the construction. This isn't part of the transit build, he says slowly. Look at the pore pattern. This section's older. A lot older. How much older? He shakes his head. Older than anything else down here, boss. I'd guess pre-war. Maybe further back than that. I think about my father again, a man born decades after any war old enough to leave marks like this, and something in my chest goes tight and cold in a way that has nothing to do with the temperature reading still falling on every screen in the command station. Behind us, footsteps echo down the access corridor, and I turn to find Priya standing at the edge of the light, Femi's hand in hers, both of them staring past me at the sealed barrier with an expression I can't quite read. Femi's been having dreams, she says quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. Since we got here. He says there's a door in them. A door with the wrong number of edges. I look down at the boy, who stares back at me with the flat, unblinking directness that only children manage to pull off without meaning anything sinister by it. What's behind the door in your dream? I ask him. Femi doesn't answer right away. He looks past me, at the sealed sublevel 4 access, at the strange, older concrete Otis is still running his hand across, and when he finally speaks his voice comes out small and certain in a way that raises every hair on the back of my neck. Something's waiting for you to remember it, he says. It's been cold a long time. Longer than the snow outside. Nobody says anything for a long moment. Somewhere above us, the generator hums its steady, reassuring rhythm, and the temperature readout on the wall monitor ticks down another degree, sliding past -130 on its slow crawl toward the number I remember, the number that should be the absolute floor of how bad this gets. Except now, standing in front of a sealed door decades older than the rest of this building, listening to a 9-year-old describe a dream he has no reasonable way of connecting to anything real, I'm no longer entirely certain the number I remember is actually the floor at all. I think about Dominic's photograph, a deed with my father's signature and an address I've never seen. I think about the initials he buried in a clause nobody bothered translating out of legal boilerplate. I think about a boy describing a door with the wrong number of edges in a dream he had no way of knowing matched anything real happening 3 floors beneath his own bed. Whatever my father sealed away down here before he ever sold this property, whatever reason he had for burying it under decades of bureaucratic silence instead of simply telling his own son about it, I no longer believe it was an accident that I ended up back in this exact building, on this exact timeline, 11 days before the coldest event this planet has ever recorded. I look at Otis. Can you open it? He studies the barrier a moment longer, running his hand along the old seam one final time, and when he finally answers, his voice carries none of the easy confidence he's shown fixing every other problem in this place over the past week. I can open it, he says. But boss, I don't think that's the question you should be asking. What's the question I should be asking? Otis looks past me, down the dark corridor, toward a door that predates everything else in this building by a margin none of us can fully explain, and for the first time since the freeze began, I see something on his face that looks a great deal like genuine fear. The question, he says slowly, is why your father wanted it to stay shut. Behind us, the exterior alarm sounds for the first time since the freeze began, sharp and sudden, cutting through the corridor like a blade. I turn and sprint back toward the command station, Priya pulling Femi close behind me, Otis right on my heels, and by the time I reach the bank of monitors, my perimeter cameras are already showing me something that has nothing to do with sealed doors or my father's secrets at all. A convoy of vehicles, headlights cutting through the falling snow, rolling to a stop directly outside my main entrance. Armed figures spilling out of the back of a modified transport truck, moving with the disciplined, coordinated precision of people who have done this exact thing before. At the front of the group, unmistakable even through the grainy exterior feed, stands Dominic, a rifle slung across his shoulder that he never once mentioned owning in 18 months of friendship, and beside him, wrapped in a coat I don't recognize, Celine, staring directly up at the camera she somehow already knows is there. She raises her hand and knocks on the reinforced door, slow and deliberate, 3 times. Then she looks straight into the lens and smiles. I stare at that smile for a long moment, feeling every certainty I walked into this second chance would start to crack down the middle at once. In the life I already lived through, Dominic and Celine never found me until months into the freeze, exhausted, starving, easy to overpower with nothing but numbers and desperation. This time, they're standing at my door on day 9, armed, organized, and moving with a confidence that has no business existing yet, not this early, not against a shelter they shouldn't even know the full layout of. Which means someone told them more than they should ever have been able to learn. And looking at the photograph still open on my second monitor, the deed with my father's signature, the address I've never seen, I understand with a sudden, sinking certainty that whatever Celine found in his old files wasn't a coincidence at all. Somebody wanted me to find this place. And somebody else clearly knew exactly how to use that against me. Behind me, Femi's small voice cuts through the tense silence of the command station, quiet and utterly certain in a way that no 9-year-old boy should ever sound. "They're not the ones you should be afraid of," he says, staring not at the monitors showing Dominic's convoy, but back down the dark corridor toward the sealed door on sublevel 4. "It's waking up because they're here. It heard them." Nobody in that room has a single answer for him. Outside, the temperature reads -138 degrees and still falling, cold enough to kill anyone standing exposed on my doorstep within minutes. And somewhere beneath all 4 sublevels of the safest building in this entire frozen city, something my own father spent his whole life keeping secret has just started, for the first time in longer than any of us can guess, to stir. I switch on the outdoor speaker before anyone else in the room can suggest a plan, because the longer Dominic stands out there in air cold enough to kill him, the more time he has to remember he isn't actually invincible just because he's holding a rifle. "You're standing in -138 degrees, I say, my voice carrying out into the storm through the entrance speaker. "You have maybe 6 minutes before that gear you're wearing stops mattering at all. Whatever you came here for, you don't have time to negotiate it." Dominic doesn't flinch. He steps closer to the camera, snow already crusting along his collar, and when he speaks his voice carries the particular calm of a man who has rehearsed this moment more than once. "We're not negotiating, Griffin. We're collecting. You've got room for 11 people down there, and you're going to make room for a few more. How do you know how many people I've got?" Something flickers across his face, small and quick, gone before I can fully read it. Does it matter? It matters enormously, and the fact that he won't answer tells me exactly as much as a straight answer would have. Someone gave him numbers he shouldn't have any way of knowing, the same way someone apparently handed Celine a deed that leads straight to a sealed chamber my own father spent his whole life keeping quiet about. Beside me, Otis leans in close enough to keep his voice below the speaker's range. "Boss, that door holds against anything short of military ordnance. Whatever he's got out there, it isn't getting through." "I know." I keep my eyes on the screen, on Celine standing half a step behind Dominic, arms wrapped tight around herself against a cold that no coat in the world is fully rated to survive. That's not what worries me. What worries me is the 6 minutes Dominic just casually gambled with his own life over, standing in weather that kills exposed skin in a fraction of that time, without a single flicker of real fear crossing his face. People don't behave that way unless they already believe, on some level, that the cold isn't actually going to be the thing that kills them tonight. I switch the feed to a wider angle, sweeping the street behind his convoy, and that's when I see it. A second vehicle, unmarked, parked half a block back, engine running, headlights dark. Nobody's gotten out of it. Nobody's approached the entrance with the rest of the group. It's just sitting there, waiting, the way you wait when you already know exactly how a situation is going to resolve itself and you're simply here to observe the outcome. I don't know who's in that second vehicle. I have a feeling, sitting there watching it idle in air cold enough to freeze diesel fuel solid within the hour, that whoever it is matters a great deal more than Dominic standing at my door with a rifle he's never fired at anything living. Celine steps forward before I can decide what to do about any of it, moving past Dominic to stand directly beneath the camera, and when she speaks, her voice carries none of the pleading tone from her earlier messages. It's flatter now, stripped of performance, almost businesslike. "Griffin, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually listen before you decide anything. You've got about 5 minutes of listening left in you before that cold stops caring what either of us wants." "I know." She doesn't look at Dominic. "The deed. The property with your father's name on it. I didn't find that going through old files, Griffin. Someone gave it to me. 3 weeks before any of this started. A man I'd never met before showed up at my office, said he had information that would matter to my future husband someday soon. I thought he was some kind of scam artist. I almost had security throw him out. Behind me, I hear Femi's small, steady breathing, and I don't have to turn around to know he's listening to every word of this with the same unsettling calm he's shown since the moment we found the sealed door. 3 weeks before the freeze, I say slowly. Before anyone could have known what was coming. I know how it sounds. For the first time since she arrived on my doorstep, Celine's composure cracks. Just slightly, just enough to show something underneath it that might actually be fear instead of manipulation. He knew things, Griffin. He knew about your father. He knew there was something buried under whatever property you'd eventually end up buying, though he never said Kessler Vaults specifically, not until Dominic found the listing himself 2 days after the freeze hit. He said if I wanted to survive what was coming, I needed to make sure you opened that door before someone else did. Who was he? He never gave a name. He just left the folder and told me to keep it safe until it mattered. She hesitates, glancing back once at the second vehicle idling half a block behind them, the one still sitting dark and silent in the storm. Griffin, I think he's here. I think that's him. I stare at the unmarked vehicle on the monitor for a long moment, feeling every piece of certainty I walked into this second chance with rearrange itself one more time. I never told anyone about Sublevel 4. I barely knew about it myself until 3 days ago, buried in a legal clause nobody but Otis and I have discussed since. And yet someone approached Celine weeks before the freeze even started, armed with knowledge about my father that I don't fully possess myself, and orchestrated an entire chain of events that has landed his people at my door at the exact moment something ancient beneath my feet has started, according to a 9-year-old's unervingly specific dream, to wake up. This was never random. None of it. Not the second chance, not the deed, not Dominic showing up armed and organized 9 days into a catastrophe that should have taken him months to survive on his own. Someone has been steering this entire board since long before I ever opened my eyes 11 days before the freeze, and I have no idea yet whether that someone is an enemy, an ally, or something in between. Get away from my door, I tell Celine, and for the first time since she arrived, I mean it as a warning rather than a rejection. Whoever that is behind you, I don't think he came here to help either of us. She doesn't move fast enough. The second vehicle's headlights snap on all at once, blinding against the falling snow, and the engine roars to life as it surges forward down the street. Dominic spins toward it, rifle coming up on pure instinct, and I watch on my monitor as the vehicle doesn't slow down at all, doesn't stop, doesn't do anything except plow directly through the loose formation of his people gathered near my entrance. Screaming erupts across the audio feed. I see Cole Reyes's brother, Ashton, standing beside me at the command station, go pale and grip the console edge hard enough to whiten his knuckles, because 2 of the figures caught in the vehicle's path aren't strangers to him at all. They're 2 of the survivors Dominic dragged along from what's left of their old apartment building. People Ashton apparently knew before any of this started. By the time the vehicle skids to a stop against a snowbank 30 yards down the street, 3 people are down in the snow, unmoving, and the driver's door swings open onto a figure I've genuinely never seen before in either version of my life. He's tall, unhurried, dressed in clothing that looks entirely too light for weather this severe, and when he speaks, his voice carries clearly through my exterior microphones despite the howling wind, like the storm itself is choosing to make room for it. Griffin Hale, he says, looking directly up at my camera as if he can see straight through the lens into the room where I'm sitting. Your father made me a promise 11 years ago, right before he died. I've been waiting a very long time to collect on it. I don't answer him. I can't, not with 3 bodies lying motionless in the snow outside my entrance and Dominic scrambling backward from the wrecked vehicle with genuine terror on his face for the first time since he arrived. Behind me, Priya has both hands pressed over Femi's ears, though the boy doesn't look frightened at all. He's watching the monitor with the same flat, unnerving calm he showed me in the corridor outside Sublevel 4, and when he finally speaks, his small voice cuts clean through the chaos on the audio feed. That's not a person, he says. Not all the way. It's wearing one. Otis mutters something under his breath that isn't quite a prayer, and on the screen, the stranger tilts his head slightly, as if he heard the boy's comment through 4 feet of reinforced concrete and 40 yards of open street, which should be impossible, and yet I find myself believing it anyway. Your father sealed that door because he was afraid of what would happen if it opened without the right hands doing the opening, the stranger continues, his voice still perfectly level despite the storm howling around him, despite 3 people lying dead or dying in the snow at his feet, none of which seems to register with him as urgent in any way. I've spent 11 years waiting for those hands to grow up. I'd say the timing has worked out rather well. What do you want? I finally manage, my voice tighter than I mean it to sound. I want you to open the door, Griffin. That's all I've ever wanted. Everything else, the freeze, the second chance you've been quietly living inside for the past 11 days, all of it was simply the fastest way to get you standing exactly where you're standing right now, in front of the one door in this entire frozen world that actually matters. The floor seems to tilt slightly beneath me, though nothing in the room has actually moved. You did this. The freeze. You caused it. For the first time, something that might be genuine amusement crosses the stranger's face. No. I didn't cause the freeze, Griffin. I'm not nearly that powerful, and frankly, neither is what's sleeping beneath your feet. But I'll admit I recognized what the freeze meant the moment the first readings came in from the polls, and I understood immediately that it would either wake what your father sealed away on its own, given enough time, or someone with the right blood in their veins would have to wake it deliberately before the cold did something far worse first. Dominic, still scrambling backward through the snow, finds his voice again, thin and cracked with terror. You told me this was about supplies. About getting inside a shelter before the cold killed all of us. The stranger doesn't even glance at him. I told you what you needed to hear to bring Celine here, and Celine needed only to hear what would bring her fiancé's attention back to a deed with his father's name on it. Everyone in this story has been exactly as useful as I required them to be, Dominic. Nothing more. I watch Dominic's face crumble in real time, watch 18 months of friendship and however many weeks of whatever plan he thought he was executing collapse under the weight of finally understanding he was never anything more than a tool being moved across someone else's board. Behind me, Otis grips my shoulder, hard enough to pull my focus back into the room. Boss. Whatever that thing is out there, it's not getting through that door. Not without you opening it yourself. That's the one thing we've still got control over. He's right, and the realization steadies something in my chest that had started slipping loose. Whatever this stranger is, whatever he actually wants from sublevel 4, he needs me to open that door willingly. He hasn't forced it. He hasn't even tried the exterior entrance, hasn't raised a single hand against the reinforced barrier I spent 8 days and $4 million building. He's standing in weather that should be killing him outright, patient as still water, waiting for an invitation he can't simply take by force. Which means, whatever else is true tonight, I'm not as powerless in this as I felt 30 seconds ago. Get away from my building, I tell him through the speaker, my voice steadier now than it's been since this conversation started. You don't get to decide when that door opens. I do. The stranger studies the camera for a long moment, and when he finally responds, there's no anger in it at all, only a kind of patient, almost paternal disappointment that unsettles me more than outright rage would have. Your father said something very similar to me the last time we spoke, he says. It didn't change the outcome then either. I'll be waiting, Griffin, for exactly as long as it takes. The cold isn't going anywhere, and neither is what's sleeping beneath your father's old door. He turns without another word, walks back toward the wrecked vehicle with unhurried steps through air that should be killing him within seconds, and climbs inside. The engine turns over, headlights swinging back around, and the vehicle pulls away down a street lined with 3 bodies already half buried under fresh snowfall. Dominic stands alone in the storm for a long moment, staring after it, and then, slowly, he turns and looks up at my camera one final time. Griffin, he says, and his voice sounds nothing like the confident man who arrived here 20 minutes ago with a rifle and a photograph. Whatever's happening here, I don't understand any of it. I just wanted us to survive. Please. I look at him a long moment on the monitor, at Celine standing frozen beside him, both of them out of time in every sense that matters, and I think about 8 months of a life I already lived once, about a door that never opened for me when I was the one standing in the snow. I don't open the exterior entrance. But I do something I never once considered doing in my old life, standing on the other side of a door exactly like this one. I activate the outer buffer chamber, the same isolation airlock I built for every legitimate survivor who's found their way here over the past 9 days, and I cycle it open just wide enough for 2 people. 72 hours quarantine. I tell them both through the speaker. Same rules as everyone else. You break them, you're back out in that storm, and I won't hesitate a second time. Do you understand me? Celine's face crumbles with something that might be relief or might be shame or might genuinely be both at once, and she doesn't answer with words at all, just nods and pulls Dominic toward the opening airlock before either of us can change our minds. I don't fully understand yet why I let them in. I only know that I refuse to become the kind of person who repeats every cruelty done to him simply because he finally has the power not to, and that decision, more than any door I've sealed or opened tonight, feels like the one thing in this entire impossible story that's actually still mine to choose. The airlock cycles shut behind them, and for a long moment, the command station falls completely silent except for the steady hum of the generator and the soft, persistent beep of the exterior temperature sensors still counting downward. Then Femi speaks again, quiet and certain, and every hair on my arms rises at once. It's awake now, he says, looking not at the monitors, not at the airlock, but down the dark corridor towards sublevel 4. It heard him say your father's name. It remembers that name. I don't sleep that night. None of us do. I sit at the command station running every camera feed I have, watching the storm rage on outside while somewhere below us, sublevel 4 sits exactly as sealed as it's been for decades, and yet the temperature readout on the sensor I had Otis install just outside that barrier 3 days ago, the one I nearly forgot existed, has started climbing. Not falling, like every other reading in this entire frozen city. Climbing. By dawn it's risen 4 full degrees above ambient, a small enough shift that I might have dismissed it as sensor error on any other night, except Otis confirms the same reading independently, standing in the corridor with his flashlight trained on the old, mismatched concrete, and the look on his face tells me he's just as unsettled by 4 degrees of warmth as I am. Something's generating heat behind that wall, he says quietly. Boss, whatever's down there, it isn't dead. It never was. I don't decide to open it right away. For 2 more days I run every test I can think of, temperature readings, sound sensors pressed against the old concrete, a borescope camera Otis rigs through a hairline crack near the base of the seam, but the footage comes back showing nothing except darkness and a faint, rhythmic pulse of warmer air that makes my skin crawl every time I watch it. Celine and Dominic finish their quarantine on the 3rd day, and when I finally let them through into the living quarters, neither of them argues about the rules or tries to reclaim any version of the people they used to be around me. Dominic spends most of his time keeping to himself, helping Cole and Ashton with inventory rotations, quiet in a way I've never once seen from him in 18 months of friendship. Celine, for her part, gravitates toward Priya and Femi almost immediately, and I catch her one evening sitting on the floor of the grow room, helping Femi water the tomato seedlings, her voice soft and unguarded in a way I don't fully recognize from the woman who once threatened to end our engagement over a house deed. I don't trust either of them completely. I'm not sure I ever will again. But watching them both slowly become useful, ordinary members of a community instead of the villains I spent a lifetime remembering them as, I start to understand something about second chances that I never expected to learn. The people who hurt you rarely stay exactly the shape you remember them in, once the stakes change enough to strip away whatever convenient excuse they were hiding behind. On the 5th night after the confrontation at my door, the temperature reading outside sublevel 4 has climbed to 9 degrees above ambient, and Femi wakes screaming from a dream he can't fully describe except to say, over and over, that the door is starting to remember how to open on its own. That's when I finally decide I'm not waiting any longer to find out what's actually behind it. I bring Otis with me, and against every instinct telling me to leave him safely upstairs, I bring Femi too, because whatever connection the boy seems to have to whatever's sealed down there, I have a growing certainty that trying to keep him away from it entirely might be far more dangerous than letting him near it under controlled conditions. Otis cuts through the old seam with a plasma torch borrowed from the mechanical floor, and it takes nearly 3 hours of careful, methodical work before the barrier finally gives way, not with an explosion or a groan of collapsing concrete, but with a soft, almost gentle exhale of warm air that smells faintly of somewhere green and growing, utterly out of place 4 stories beneath a city buried in snow cold enough to shatter bone. The chamber beyond isn't flooded at all, despite every building record insisting it should be. It's dry and warm and lit by a soft, pulsing amber glow coming from somewhere deeper inside, and the walls, when I run my flashlight across them, are covered floor to ceiling in carvings that predate anything I recognize from any history I've ever studied, spirals and interlocking rings surrounding a central chamber where a single object rests on a low stone plinth. It looks, at first glance, almost disappointingly simple. A smooth, dark stone roughly the size of a human heart, veined through with faint threads of amber light that pulse in a slow, steady rhythm, exactly matching the rise and fall of warm air moving through the chamber like the whole space is breathing. Femi walks toward it without hesitation, and before either Otis or I can stop him, he presses his small hand flat against the stone. The amber light flares bright enough to fill the entire chamber, and for one heart-stopping second I'm certain I've made the single worst decision of either of my lives, bringing a 9-year-old boy within arm's reach of something my own father spent decades keeping sealed away from the entire world. Then the light settles, dimming back to its slow, steady pulse, and Femi turns to look at me with an expression that isn't fear at all. It's relief, deep and total, like something that had been holding its breath for a very long time has finally been allowed to exhale. It's not angry, he says quietly. It was just lonely. It's been alone since the last person who could hear it stopped visiting. I step closer, and as I do, words rise unbidden into my mind, not spoken aloud by anyone in the chamber, but arriving whole and complete the way a memory arrives, except this memory isn't mine. I see my father, decades younger than I ever knew him, standing in this exact chamber with his hand pressed against the same stone, tears on his face, making a promise to something that isn't quite alive and isn't quite anything else either. I see him sealing the door behind him, not out of fear, but out of grief, because whatever bargain he struck here cost him something he was never willing to risk passing on to his own son. And I understand all at once, exactly what this chamber is, and exactly what the stranger outside my door was actually asking me to give away. This stone isn't a weapon. It isn't a monster. It's an anchor, ancient beyond any record this city has ever kept, built by people who understood something about the world's climate that modern science never rediscovered, a stabilizing heart that has kept this exact patch of Earth from ever fully freezing or fully burning through every catastrophe this planet has already survived long before recorded history began. My father wasn't sealing away a danger. He was protecting a promise, refusing to let anyone use the last living anchor of its kind to save one small radius of the world while the stranger outside clearly intends to use it for something far larger and far more costly to whoever bonds with it. He wants me to wake it fully, I say slowly, understanding arriving in pieces even as I speak them aloud. Not just this chamber. Something bigger. He said there might be others like this, sleeping, and he needs someone with the right blood to reach them all. Otis stares at me, then at the stone, then back at me again. Boss, what happens if you say yes to that? I don't have an answer yet. But standing in a warm, ancient chamber 4 stories beneath a city frozen colder than anything in recorded history, watching a 9-year-old boy smile at a stone that just showed me my own father's private grief like it was handing me a gift, I understand that whatever choice waits for me next, it's no longer a choice I can make only for myself. We seal the chamber again that night, not out of fear this time, but out of caution, and I don't tell the stranger anything at all when his next message arrives 3 days later, delivered through a note Otis finds slipped somehow through the exterior airlock despite every seal I've triple-checked, written in handwriting that makes the back of my neck prickle with a cold that has nothing to do with the temperature outside. You have what you need now. Take your time deciding, Griffin. I've waited 11 years already. I can wait a little longer for you to understand exactly what your father was so afraid of. 6 months pass in the underground shelter that used to be nothing but a rotting hole in the ground, and in that time, the Kessler vaults become something I never once imagined building in either version of my life. Not just a bunker. A genuine community, 17 people strong by the time the worst of the freeze finally begins to ease, sharing food from a grow room that never once runs dry, sharing labor and skill and, slowly, painfully, something that starts to look a great deal like trust. Celine never asks me to forgive her fully, and I never quite manage it either, but she earns her place here every single day regardless, and somewhere in that slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding a life inside 4 sealed walls, I stop measuring her against the woman who once smiled at a camera while I decided whether to let her freeze. Dominic, for his part, spends the 6 months quietly proving himself in ways that never once ask for credit, and the day Cole Reyes's younger brother nearly loses 2 fingers to frostbite during a supply run gone wrong, it's Dominic who carries him the last quarter mile back through the storm without a single word of complaint. Not everyone survives those 6 months. Walt Ferris, the old man with a badly set leg, passes quietly in his sleep during the 4th month, his body simply too worn down by decades of hard living to fully recover from everything the first weeks of the freeze took out of him, and we bury him in a small, sealed chamber off the mechanical floor because there's nowhere else in this frozen world left to lay anyone properly to rest. It isn't the death I remember from any version of this story, and somehow that makes it harder, not easier, to carry, because for the first time since I woke up 11 days before the freeze, I understand that having foreknowledge was never the same thing as having control. By the time the exterior temperature finally climbs back above -40, stable enough that short trips outside stop being an automatic death sentence, the Kessler vaults have become something worth defending with everything I have left. And that's exactly when the stranger's final message arrives, delivered the same impossible way as the last one, slipped through seals that should never have let it through. The world froze because something far older than any weather system finally stirred in its sleep, Griffin. Your father's anchor was never the only one. There are others, scattered across every continent, buried the same way his was, waiting for the right blood to find them. I've spent 11 years finding you. I'll spend as many more as it takes finding the rest of what your father was hiding, whether you help me or not. I sit with that letter for a long time, sublevel 4's warm, amber pulse visible on the monitor beside me, Femi's small handprint still faintly outlined in dust on that ancient stone from the day he first touched it, and somewhere above me, 17 people who trust me with their lives are sleeping soundly in a shelter that's kept them warmer and safer than anywhere else left in this entire frozen world. I don't know yet whether opening that chamber fully was the right choice or the beginning of something far bigger than one family's buried grief. I don't know whether the stranger outside is an enemy, a rival, or simply another desperate man chasing the same impossible promise my father spent his whole life trying to protect the rest of the world from. What I do know, standing at the edge of everything I've built since I woke up 11 days before the sky itself forgot how to hold any warmth at all, is that this was never just my story to finish alone. Somewhere out there, across a frozen planet neither science nor memory can fully explain anymore, other doors exactly like mine are waiting to be found. And for the first time since I opened my eyes back at the very beginning of all of this, already knowing exactly how the ending was supposed to go, I have absolutely no idea what happens next. Only that whatever the stranger is planning, he's going to have to go through every single person sleeping safely inside these walls to get it. I fold the letter once, twice, and set it down on the console beside the monitor still showing sublevel 4's steady amber pulse, and I sit there a long while listening to the quiet hum of a generator that has kept 17 strangers alive through the coldest winter this planet has ever recorded. Down the hall, I hear Femi laugh at something Celine says while they check on the tomato seedlings together, the sound carrying easily through a shelter that no longer feels like a bunker at all, but something closer to a home nobody here expected to find at the bottom of a rotting hole in the ground. Otis is running a final diagnostic on the mechanical floor, whistling something tuneless under his breath the way he always does when a repair goes exactly according to plan. Somewhere above all of us, a city that spent 6 months buried under snow cold enough to shatter bone is slowly, cautiously, beginning to dig itself back out. I think about my father again, a man I spent 11 years believing I understood completely, and I realize that whatever grief he carried into that sealed chamber decades ago, whatever bargain he refused to finish, he never once stopped protecting the people he loved because of it. He just did it quietly, alone, without ever asking anyone else to carry the weight of a choice that was always going to be his to make. I'm not willing to make that same mistake twice. I gather everyone in the main living quarters that night, all 17 of them, Priya and Femi, Otis and Soledad, Cole and Ashton, Ines still quiet but steadier now than the frightened woman who first came through my airlock, even Celine and Dominic sitting near the back, and I tell them everything. The chamber, the stone, the stranger's letter, the other anchors scattered across a frozen world, waiting to be found by someone with the right blood or the wrong intentions. Nobody argues that I should have kept it secret. Nobody suggests we simply seal the chamber back up and pretend none of this ever happened. Instead, Soledad, the retired engineer who talked her way past my quarantine on nothing but the sound of a failing pump, stands up first and says the only thing that actually needs saying. Then we figure out how to protect it properly, she says. Together, this time. Nobody down here signed up to survive the end of the world just to hand the next part of it over to some stranger with a grudge against a dead man. One by one, the rest of them nod, and something settles into place in my chest that feels, for the first time since I woke up 11 days before the freeze already knowing exactly how everything was supposed to end, like the actual beginning of a story I never got to live the first time around. Outside, the wind is finally starting to quiet. The temperature keeps climbing, degree by cautious degree, and somewhere beneath 4 sealed sublevels of reinforced concrete, an ancient stone continues its slow, steady pulse, patient as it's always been, waiting to see what the last living Hale decides to do with the promise his father died still trying to keep. I don't know yet if I'm going to answer the stranger's letter. I don't know if there are truly other anchors scattered across this frozen planet, or whether finding them means saving what's left of the world or handing someone the means to end it completely. What I know is that whatever comes through that airlock next, friend or enemy, human or something wearing the shape of one, it isn't finding 17 desperate strangers clawing at each other over the last scraps of warmth left in a dying city. It's finding a family. And for the first time in either version of my life, I'm not afraid of what happens when that door finally opens again.